Well, the FBI is back at the house at 1122 King Road. Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And I want to start out today by talking about a conversation that I had a couple of days ago in person with a gentleman who previously worked in military intelligence, and now he works in civilian intelligence. So I had the opportunity to talk to this gentleman, and of course I wanted to talk to him about the Idaho 4 case and kind of get some feedback about his thoughts about the Idaho 4 case. So I asked him if he was familiar with this case, and he had actually seen this case on the news when it was reported, but he didn't really know anything about the case. He had heard of it on the news, and that was the extent of his knowledge about these crimes. So I gave him a basic rundown of the evidence and the people involved, and basically just a real short rundown of the case. And as I'm explaining to him, he's listening very intently, and he had a few remarks while I was explaining to him the case. And at the very end, when I was done explaining my case, I'm looking at him because I'm anxious to hear his response. And he looks at me very casually, and he says, "What did this suspect do to piss off the people in the law enforcement community?" I kind of looked at him because I hadn't really thought about that angle. About Bryan Kohberger was in the law enforcement community. He was being educated in criminology. He had worked and studied under a world famous criminologist. A world famous criminal psychologist is who actually recommended Bryan Kohberger for his PhD program. So Bryan Kohberger has worked within this community. Now, how this man explained it made a lot of sense to me. And basically what he said is, he said it doesn't sound like this suspect has any connections to the victims or to this house, but he does have connections in the law enforcement community. He has a connection to the law enforcement community. He had just applied for a position with law enforcement in Pullman, Washington. His studies involved working within law enforcement. So he didn't have any ties to anyone involved, any of these victims or this house that we're aware of. But he does have connections to people in the law enforcement community. So it was a great observation, and it was the first thing that came out of his mouth. So he made it sound very casual. What did Bryan Kohberger do to piss these people off in the law enforcement community? Now, another aspect that he mentioned about what I was talking to him about is, why would law enforcement follow this suspect 2,500 miles across country and just track him? Why not just pull him in and question him? Why follow him 2,500 miles across the country? We talked about the traffic stops. And because at some point along the way, I believe that law enforcement lost track of Bryan Kohberger. Now, apparently, you have a very dangerous man who's traveling across country, and law enforcement is tracking this man. I believe they lost track of him. They needed to call in state police to help them out. They needed to pull over Bryan Kohberger so they could stop his car and locate his whereabouts immediately. So I believe that's why he was pulled over. He was pulled over for such a BS reason that it leads me to believe that he was pulled over so they could gather him back up because they lost track of him on this trip. I just wanted to start with this because I guess it's a little bit of a lead-in to another video. So I am going to make a complete video about this conversation that I had and these observations, because these observations are very simple. And I definitely want to look into this more about Bryan Kohberger's relationship with people in the law enforcement community and how that might factor into this investigation. So I'm definitely going to do a whole video about that. But let's talk about the FBI revisiting the crime scene this past couple of days. They were in the house for 2 days. We know that they took the boards off of the windows and doors. And apparently, as it's been reported, they were revisiting the crime scene so that they could get more information because they want to construct a three-dimensional model and possibly a virtual model as well. So they're using very high-tech equipment to do all of this. Very high-tech equipment. They have a drone in the air. They've got imaging equipment. They have very high-tech equipment that they're going into this house with to basically construct a model to scale of this house so they can possibly demonstrate in court and use it as a display. This is really high-tech stuff, really high-tech equipment that the FBI is using. Now, they used this equipment the first time that they went into the house, right after the crimes occurred. So they did use this equipment in the first part of the investigation. So it is a little odd that they would go back to the crime scene to basically gather more information, but to basically check their work and possibly tighten up their case. Because now they have time. Now they have time. They're saying that this trial could happen next year in 2024, which isn't that far away. But this trial could happen in 2024. It could happen in 2025. There's still a lot of steps that need to take place before Bryan Kohberger can go on trial for these crimes. So now they have time to go back to the crime scene and kind of tighten up their case. Now, the one thing I want to say is that it's a good thing that there's a house there for them to do this, for them to revisit this house. It's a good thing there's a house there for them to revisit. So thank goodness that the parents of these victims were able to block them from demolishing this house. Because if not, the house wouldn't be there for them to revisit. That's one of the confusing, there's so many confusing aspects of this investigation because we're looking at this investigation and we're thinking there must be some very smart, very clever individuals investigating these crimes. But then they turn around and propose, like, let's demolish the house. Let's wipe out some major evidence. It doesn't make sense because that doesn't seem very intelligent. That doesn't seem very smart to demolish the house before Bryan Kohberger's gone on trial. So thank goodness the parents of these victims were able to stop that house from being demolished, because now they're revisiting the house. That's what's crazy to me. That is what's crazy to me, is making these decisions that are going to make their job that much more difficult. If this house is intact, it makes it a lot easier to go back and revisit it. And it seems like that would make sense. It makes sense to most of us, I think. You would think that it would make sense to them as well. They work in this field. Now, they have a lot of this high-tech equipment. They have imaging drones up in the air, taking images of the exterior of this house. They went into the inside of the house, and they're using all of this imaging equipment. Now, it's also reported that they're going to be doing some audio testing inside this house, which, it would really be nice to have the house intact, to have it the same way that it was when they found it. But they don't. The furniture's gone. Another aspect of this investigation where you think, why would you remove all of the furniture? You might need to go back into this house. You might need this. You might need this furniture in this house. You might need to recreate this crime. So why would you move the furniture out of the house? That's another aspect that I'll never understand about this, is why they moved the furniture out of the house. Because now the testing is going to be different. The results are going to be different because the house isn't intact. So the audio is definitely going to be different because the house is going to sound different with decor on the walls and with furniture in the house. So these investigators and law enforcement have done things in the past that haven't made sense to a lot of us. And they just keep saying, it's okay, it's okay. But then what happens is like right now, had the families not blocked this house from being demolished, the house wouldn't even be there for them to revisit and for them to tighten up their case against Bryan Kohberger. Had they left the furniture and everything intact in the house, they could go back and revisit this house just as it was when they found it. But they can't do that now because they've moved all the furniture out of the house. So that creates a lot of confusion because you're talking about people who we are assuming are very intelligent, but then they do things like this. And it doesn't make sense. And that's why we question their actions, because it doesn't make sense. People with common sense are thinking, why are we moving all the furniture out of this house? We might need to go back and revisit this house. But that's what they did. And it's these things that don't make sense. Now, it's very possible that the prosecution has requested that the FBI go in and maybe get some more evidence, maybe tighten up their case. They want to dot their I's and cross their T's because now they have the time to do this. Bryan Kohberger waived his right to a speedy trial. So this trial should be happening, but it's not because Bryan Kohberger waived his right to a speedy trial. So now they have plenty of time to go in and tighten up their case. Or are they going back to get more evidence that they feel like they need in this trial? Because they were totally willing to go into trial with what they had. So is this a signal that what they had maybe wasn't as solid, wasn't as concrete as they would have liked us to believe. Because a lot of us are watching this and thinking there's got to be more evidence than this. The prosecutors have to have more evidence than what they have revealed so far. Are they going back to get that evidence now? Or are they just going back now because they have the time? Now, another question that I've heard is, why did Bryan Kohberger waive his right to a speedy trial? Is it possible that the defense believes that these crimes, these types of crimes, could happen again? Is it possible that they waived their right to a speedy trial because they believe that given some time, that whoever committed these crimes might commit more of these crimes? That's another possibility. There's a lot of aspects of this investigation that really don't make sense because we are looking at it as these investigators must be smart. They must be experienced. They must be intelligent. And I believe that they are. But the actions that they're taking in this investigation defy common sense. Demolishing the house, which is, in my opinion, evidence. Important evidence. That just doesn't make sense. Why wipe out that evidence before Bryan Kohberger has gone to trial? Why load up the house? Why pack up the house and remove all of the furniture before Bryan Kohberger goes to trial? We might need all of this. Nobody has stopped to think we might need all of this. It just doesn't make sense. So please stay tuned for my next video. I'm definitely going to talk about the connection between Bryan Kohberger and the law enforcement community, because I think that that needs to be looked into. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for all of the interaction, and I've gotten some really great information from the comment section, from messages that are sent to me. I really appreciate that, and we'll see you next time.